have on the phone with us now William Binney. Now, Mr. Binney worked for the NSA for over 30 years, and he resigned shortly after September 11th because of concerns about the way data was being collected. Mr. Binney, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yes. You worked for quite some time with the NSA. You were very high-ranking. You were technical director, global technical director for them. Tell us why you were concerned 12 years ago about what the NSA was doing.
Well, I mean, the basic problem I had with what they were doing was they were pulling in all the data that would reconstruct the social networks of everybody in the United States, whoever used the telephone or sent an email. So that basically was my concern, because that's exactly what the East German Stasi, the KGB, the SS, and all the totalitarian states have done all along. I mean, my primary job there was against the Soviet Union. So yes. I knew exactly what the procedures were that set up that country and how it operated. And this is exactly what we were adopting by doing this.
Yes, you've seen that movie before, and you know how it ends. Now, exactly. we just had a court decision today from a federal judge in New York. This is a Judge Pauley, who has ruled against the judge that said that this was unconstitutional. We just had a district judge say that it was unconstitutional. Now we've got a conflicting ruling. This judge, and I wanted to get you to respond to this, he said, this is a blunt tool talking about metadata, and he says it only works because it collects everything. But you've pointed out just the opposite. You've said that collecting everything is basically flooding the NSA with data so that they can't find real criminals or real terrorists.
Yeah, that's why they failed at detecting the Fort Hood bomber, the Fort Hood shooter, or the Boston bomber, or the New York Times bomber, or the underwear bomber on the airplane. I mean, those whole series of real attacks. What they're good at is getting people to entice them into trying something, and then they arrest them.
Yes,
I mean, that's what they're good at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
instead of really stopping the real terrorists.
That's right. We see that over and over again. We see that the FBI creates a terrorist plot, they pull people in, they supply them, they train them, and then they bust them at the last minute and say, look, we caught somebody.
Exactly. And it had nothing to do with this pulling in. See, the real problem is they call this one program. Well, it's not one program, it's one process. It's the contact chaining process that they talked about on the 60 Minutes program the other day.
Mm-hmm.
That program simply does contact chaining of any data that you feed in. The problem I had was they were feeding U.S. communications with U.S. communicants. In other words, communication like your phone call to your mother or anybody in your family. That's what's building. That's what the Constitution, First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments are all about. Were to guarantee us the right to free association. Well, we don't have that under this program, because this program simply lays out everybody you associate with. And the reverse lookup process is pretty simple. If you want to take a phone number and do a reverse lookup on the web, you can find out who's involved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a question. It's just a number. The number really associates you with a name and an address, and it gives you also other kinds of information in the telephone book that you can get fairly easily. So I mean, it's not. This is not simply a number. The Congress is trying to dupe you into thinking that's all it is, and that's not true.
Yeah, it seems to me like they like to try to use they like to use semantics to call it metadata, to say that somehow metadata isn't really your own personal data, that they're really not looking at you very carefully because it's metadata. Most people's eyes just kind of glaze over when they use a technical term like metadata. They don't really understand what it is. But if it had no value, they wouldn't be collecting it, would they?
Well, exactly. But the value isn't for terrorists. It's for the law enforcement. The law enforcement is what's using it. I mean, they're using it to arrest people.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the real issue that I had with them all along.
Yeah.
In fact, we addressed this. Diane Rourke did. She used to be the House Intelligence senior staffer running the NSA account on the House Intelligence Committee, and we had discussed this, what they were doing early on in early 2002, and said if they use this to do that with law enforcement, then all those cases are potentially going to be thrown out in the future when it's discovered that they used this data from NSA to do the original arrest.
And now we
learn it wasn't acquired with a warrant.
That's right. And now what they're doing is they're handing this information over to the fusion centers, to the FBI, and they're telling them to go back and saying, well, you're not going to be able to use this information because we obtained it without a search warrant, so go back and recreate this so that you can then use that in court. They're actually instructing them about how to get around the Constitution. You said not too long ago that we are this close, holding your thumb and your forefinger pretty close together. We're this close to a police state. Now you've said we are in a police state.
Yeah, that's because of what they're doing with this data.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're doing what's called a parallel construction, so that they can introduce evidence into the court and use it to convict people. But it's evidence that's constructed after they originally arrest people based on the NSA collected information.
Yes, yes.
And that's the real problem. I mean, we're destroying what we used to have as a constitutional democracy. We're destroying this.
Yeah, let me talk to you about that too. When you're talking about the dragnet, you were very much concerned about the fact that they were going more than 2 hops out. And when we talk about that, I mentioned just before the break the whole idea of the 6 degrees of separation between different people in Hollywood and Kevin Bacon. A lot of people have seen that game where you take a movie that Kevin Bacon was in with somebody, and then you take a movie that second person was in and you relate it to somebody else. And using that kind of game, they can actually relate Kevin Bacon with just 2 hops. They can take him all the way back to Charlie Chaplin, or they can take him over to Barack Obama. You know, so when they want to go beyond 2 hops, they're essentially saying we want to get everybody, right?
Well, yes. If you just take, for example, if you have 100 people that you call, and each of those in turn has another 100, and then each of those in turn has another 100, then it's 100 times 100 times 100 numbers of nodes you're looking at, or people. That's 1 million. If you go 3 hops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so it goes up exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the point was that it doesn't get meaningful after the second hop. The second hop gives you front companies and things like that. So you can see those front companies that way.
Now, talking about what they store, you have said that you also believe that they're storing everyone's emails as well. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, that's the evidence for that is what Director Mueller of the FBI testified to in the Senate Judiciary Committee on the 30th of March of 2011. He said that he got together with the Department of Defense and put together this technology database where he could go into it and with one query get all past and all future emails as they come in on a person. His response there was he was giving one of the ways they were going to help prevent a future Fort Hood. Well, that means a U.S. person becoming radicalized, committing a terrorist act inside the United States and killing people. So he's talking about the U.S. population and getting the emails on them.
Yes, yes.
The same was true with Tim Clementi when he talked about the phone calls between one of the Tsarnaev brothers and his wife before the bombing in Boston, and how they could get back to that the intelligence community and the FBI have ways to getting back to it. Well, that's because it's recorded. He also said that no digital data is secure. And the reason, of course, is because they're recording it all. And they're building Bluffdale and storage facilities like that, one more over here at Fort Meade, and the large one down at San Antonio, and other large storage they have around the country to hold all this data.
Yeah, they don't have the capability to necessarily data mine everything right now, but of course they're building that, and if they can keep and store everything, then at some point in the future they're going to be able to retroactively go back. And that creates, I guess, not only civil liberties problems, but it even creates issues in terms of them putting this all together with AI or whatever, fingering the wrong person. I've seen reports where they're looking at somebody with a camera and trying to identify suspicious behavior, and when somebody's like, let's say they're changing their tire, they're kind of lingering around a car, and then they disappear, they're down out to the side of the camera, the AI computer is going to identify that as suspicious behavior, might report that as a car theft in progress, and the police show up and start shooting. That's a real concern, isn't it?
Yes, that's basically false positives from bad logic in any automated code they would develop. That's the thing they're going to be facing when they have the White House Big Data Initiative that was issued about 1.5 years ago is actually soliciting private industry to come up with algorithms that would go through large data sets and figure out what was important in that data for people to look at. Mm-hmm. So that's really what they're after, is try to get something that would help them do that. In the meantime, they're left having to do it by hand, having people do it. So that meant that simply means that individuals have to have specific targets to go at, and so they're at least at that point they're still limited to how they can proceed.
You know, we look at this, and you've seen how this ends because, as you pointed out, you were not only a mathematician and a cryptographer, but you also had an area of specialization of Russia. You saw how these totalitarian countries operated. You know how this ends. We know how this ends. Everybody knows how this ends. And yet they continue to offer to us this idea that we can somehow exchange our privacy, exchange our liberty for security. Whoa. Do you see that as an acceptable trade-off? Do you see that as a trade-off? I don't see that as a trade-off.
No, there's no reason to do a trade-off like that. For example, if you listen to General Alexander in his 60 Minutes interview that he did about a week ago, I guess, or a few days ago, where he said he was reflecting back on the 9/11 attack, where the two of the terrorists that came into the West Coast called back to their facility in Yemen, and he said we couldn't tell that the phone call was coming from California. And, you know, my daughter uses the phone system and the terrorists use it, so we have to collect it all and then sort it out later. That's all what I call a false syllogism. I mean, he's arguing that you don't know what the number is when they make the call, and that's simply false.
The InfoWars crew absolutely loves coffee because we love being awake. And I am somewhat of a connoisseur of coffee. So many times you go to a restaurant or even to a coffee shop and the coffee tastes like garbage. And in all the different coffees I've tried, my favorite is grown in the high mountains, in shade, Arabica, on the border with Guatemala in southern Mexico by the Chiapas farmers. I make sure we've done the research. I make sure it's the very best product that we can offer you when I put my name on it. And I believe, and it's my taste, so you may differ, that this is the best coffee in the world from southern Mexico. Wake Up America Patriot Blend, 100% organic, Arabica shade grown. And then we have the Immune Support, 100% organic coffee, infused with a special type of mushroom known to boost the immunity.
This coffee is seriously so smooth. I normally have to douse my coffee with cream and sugar and cinnamon and all kinds of tasty treats, but this, I drink this black. It is so good.
Well, that's why I like it, is that it has a kick, it has really good caffeine in it, it has a good clean wake up that lasts for a long time, doesn't give me a headache, but it's so smooth, it's so delicious. Just try it out for yourself. I'm telling you, this is my favorite coffee. We went through a lot of trouble to bring you this. Just try it, and I think you'll be hooked like we are here at InfoWars. Well, folks, find out for yourself and support the information war today. It's all available at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex, and I have on the line with us William Binney. He's a mathematician, a cryptographer, one of the highest-ranking, I think the highest-ranking NSA whistleblower. He worked for over 30 years with the NSA. And Mr. Binney, when you left, you were concerned not just with the unconstitutional spying, but you were also concerned about the fact that they were using a piece of software that was not only not working very well, but fantastically expensive compared to what had already been developed internally at the NSA. Is that correct?
But yes, except that that fantastically expensive piece of hardware never came into being and never really functioned.
So it's kind of vaporware.
Yeah, it was a good PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay. But there's a lot of the military-industrial complex is really kind of driving this, isn't there? I mean, we've had nothing but eternal war since Eisenhower warned us about this. We've had continuous warfare to feed this military-industrial complex. But that's very much a part of this new police state, isn't it?
You bet it is. I mean, what it turned out was after 9/11, some of the management at NSA said that this was a gift to NSA. That meant that their budget would be open-ended. Now they could ask for any amount of money they wanted, and they could begin to have so many contracts and grow and become so much bigger. And that's exactly what's happened. I mean, they've more than doubled their budget, more than almost 3 times. The budget's almost tripled. So they've gotten all that money, and as a result of the contracts that have been let out to all those contractors, which I refer to as bloodsuckers on the different agencies of the government. They basically need to have a problem to continue to justify getting more data. Mm-hmm. So when they have all these contracts let, they never really want to solve the problem, because once they bulk up and build buildings and add people, they have to sustain it, and they have to get follow-on contracts to keep that going. So that means more and more money. So if you solve the problem, their view is they won't be able to justify more money.
I think
keep the problem going.
I think it's very, very important for people to understand this massive, massive profit motive that these giant corporations have got to keep this thing going. They've had wars all over the world for the last 60 years, and now they've got the ideal profit center, and that is the war on terror, because they can keep morphing whoever the terrorist is. It's a war that will, obviously, by definition, never end. So they can justify an infinite amount of purchases, not only in NSA software, but they can justify it in terms of military vehicles that they're putting in all these small towns, pulling them out of Iraq and repurposing them.
Absolutely. That's really what this is all about. It's not about protecting us from terrorists. It's about feeding the industrial complex that's grown up, plus supporting law enforcement inside the United States as well as around the world, because they share, the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Agency share this knowledge from NSA with other law enforcement around the world. They simply don't tell them the source of it.
Yes.
And it's the same inside the courts here. I call this a planned, programmed perjury policy. Mm-hmm. Because it's an organized, structured plan as to how you use data from NSA, and then how you in turn perjure yourself in court by not telling not allowing the defendant discovery on the original information that was used to arrest them.
That's amazing. Now, they play games. They play semantic games when they get this data from third parties. We see them doing this when they go to your internet service provider. They just ask them, and it's like instead of getting a search warrant to search your house, they just go to your neighbor that you've left the keys with and say, we'd like to go into his house. And they say, well, sure, here it is. So they use that legal fiction to get around search warrants, but they use other semantics to do that even internally with the NSA. You've pointed out that they don't consider that the information has been collected until somebody at the NSA actually looks at it. So that means that they could collect that, what we would think of as collecting that information, and pass it on to the FBI and the CIA, and then the NSA would say that information had never been collected.
That's correct. That's exactly right. And everybody's focusing on how the NSA analysts are using this data, when in fact that's one issue. But the more important issue is how the law enforcement's using it.
Yes.
And according to Director Mueller, he can make the query directly into the databases. So
yes,
that's really much more of a concern than what NSA does with it, because they can't send people with guns at you to arrest you and incarcerate you.
Yes. As you were just saying, the FBI director has said that he could basically do what's essentially what you would do on the internet as an individual. You would go to Google and search things up. The FBI director says that he has that capability. That's a frightening thing to imagine in a country where we have the highest number of prisoners of any country in the world. People need to think about this. We have more people in prison than communist China did or has. And that's a much, much higher percentage of the population. We're going to continue talking to Mr. Binney. He's graciously consented to come on for the next segment, and we're going to talk to him about what happened to him as a whistleblower. You know, it's been said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Well, this is a good man who did something, and they came after him, and I wanted you to hear the story about how he stood up to them and how he is still speaking out. We really appreciate what he's doing. We'll be right back with William Binney. Stay tuned.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.